Hey, this is Nikita Edwards with Faith Life Music, where we give you biblical perspectives on real life matters. And today, this episode is inspired by someone that asked specifically that we do a message on the topic of forgiveness. So this one is for you. Well, forgiveness, we see it, first of all, God doing that with us. We have so much sin, but then He knew that no one could pay the price but Jesus. So let's give you some real perspectives on how do we even do forgiveness. I mean, we're constantly in relationships, right? Whether that be people at work that rub you the wrong way, whether it be a parent-child relationship, teenagers that become stubborn, whether it be a marriage, a husband and a wife trying to communicate, trying to get along with each other as they are two different individuals. So forgiveness, it's a topic that we will have to deal with if we choose to be in relationships. Now, for today, you are encouraged to go to Matthew 18, because in that, it's actually one of the disciples himself, Peter, coming up to Jesus and saying, literally in verses 21, it says, Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Now, just a quick reference. In that time, rabbis always used to say 3 times is probably the amount you should forgive. But then Peter saying really kind of like 7 times, that was like a generous thing. I mean, if rabbis say 3 times, how about 7 times? That's a generous way of the amount of forgiveness. But then Jesus comes back and he kind of makes it clear that the number of how many times to forgive someone is unlimited. I mean, yeah, he said 70 times, 7 times. But if you think about it, you're not going to count literally 70 times, 7 times, right? So when you read on in the verses, it's really a parable called the unforgiving servant. Now, let me just give you a quick narrative so you can read it later in depth. But really, it's about this servant. He has this debt, a total of so many talents that he can't pay back, right? Now, the master really represents God. And what does the master do? He says, you don't have to pay it. As in, it's forgiven. It's done. But then we see next that this servant that has been forgiven is not willing to forgive someone else who now has debt. And the end result is ultimately that we see that there's a judgment on this unforgiven servant. As in, if you don't forgive, why would God forgive you? Now, let's be honest. We have a God that's merciful. We have a God that's willing and able to forgive us. We don't even deserve it. But here's what it says in verse 35, right at the end of that parable. It says, so also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Which we really learn from this. Forgiveness is not just saying it with your mouth. You have to do it from the heart. I mean, God looks at the intent of our hearts, right? So we are encouraged today, if there's anything that we could take, number 1, if we truly know forgiveness, aren't we ought to forgive? Because you withholding forgiveness, who are you to withhold it from someone else? Are you better? Are you perfect? Are you flawless? Do you do it right all the time? Are you truly that humble that you're always on the side of doing it right and everybody else around you wrong? No, right? We all are in need of being forgiven, but also in giving forgiveness. A second thing that we could get from this parable is when I actually forgive, I actually extend to others what God has done for me. So, number 1, truly knowing forgiveness means that you ought to forgive. And number 2, takeaway is if I forgive each time, I get to extend what God has done. God has shown his compassion. That's what we really get from this unforgiving servant parable, that God is willing to forgive even when you should pay the price. And we see that ultimately with Jesus being at the cross, dying for us. So 2 more things that I want to give you. Forgiveness. That sometimes will be one-sided, but reconciliation is not always possible. And for reconciliation, you do need 2 parties to agree on it. But forgiveness does not need to be withheld from someone that's not willing to reconcile or not willing to talk to you. You could be the one to say, I will forgive. And why would you hold on to unforgiveness? It's like this toxicity. So why would you want to hold on to unforgiveness? It's like being toxic to yourself. So be encouraged. Be one that's willing to forgive because God has forgiven you. Thank you for tuning in today. Come back again for another episode. Like, share, and subscribe.